Hey folks, this is Rabble Rousing Rich Bergeron.
And Psychic Tom had crystal ball ready to go.
And the tornado is absent tonight because he's raging through Philly Stadium in outfit. Full of outfit and regalia. Is the Philly fan.
I think the Phillies won today, so he's probably celebrating.
Oh, okay then. Well, he's 7 beers deep at the pub then. But yeah, with
the big T out there for Phillies.
So if we connected him now, I don't think he would be making much sense.
No.
But anyway, we'll try to be a good substitute with a little boxing stuff, and we're actually kind of going to be giving boxing a big plug for its successes in recent months later on. But probably the biggest news of the week happens to be what might be a publicity stunt, but might be for real. Conor McGregor retiring from MMA yet again. This is the second time. But he hasn't really been very detailed about it. He said that, I'm decided to retire. And I don't think there's been much public comment other than that. And a lot of people think it's just basically a way for him to stay relevant. Even though there are a lot of people still calling him out, they want to be in a position where they can get a better name for themselves by calling him out and getting that opportunity for him. But he might also be at that point in his career where he realized he is starting to slip. He got to look at the Khabib performance as an example, and the hype train run out maybe on him, and the talent can't keep up with the ego. You never know.
Well, and then too, we have to consider that old cliche that it's hard to get up in the morning and go out and run 5 or 10 miles when you're sleeping in silk pajamas. And what I understand is, I'm a voter, so I've never tried this. What is it? Area 12 or something? Precinct 12 or 12? The name of this whiskey?
Proper 12. Proper 12, yes.
Proper. Okay. Yeah, I guess that's what that means, area in Ireland, I guess. But from what the reports I've got from a few of my friends that drink whiskey, they say it's pretty good. And so maybe he's got something going there. It could be a combination of a lot of things. Because remember, he's only, his last MMA fight prior to the Khabib fight was December of 2016, if I remember right. That he Alvarez.
Right. Well, the other thing too. The other thing too that we have to remember is how demanding Conor was when he was at height of popularity with the UFC, and he basically told them he wanted an ownership position at one point. He was so high up on himself, and he learned over the years how to leverage his popularity, and obviously he's doing it outside the cage enough that he never has to fight again if he doesn't really want to. But my theory on this is that he's quitting the UFC and MMA, but he'll show up in fighting again. Whether it's in bare-knuckle boxing against Paulie Malignaggi or in cage boxing with our former guest there, or in regular boxing. I think he will show up in fighting again, but he just wants to be away from the UFC because he doesn't believe in that corporate structure. He doesn't believe in Dana White. He doesn't probably get along as well as he used to with Dana White maybe in the beginning days. When even Dana White's mother told me that when I interviewed her that Conor McGregor said something about him at an event and made Dana White look stupid. And from that point on, Dana hated him and didn't get along at all with him. And that soured their relationship big time. So you're talking big inside info right there. Straight from Dana White's mama.
Yeah, and then again, that whole demand about ownership, I just kind of felt that would never fly.
Well, yeah, especially after they just got bought out for $4.2 billion. But at the same time, Tom Brady can buy in and get ownership. And all these other stars they allowed to buy in from the talent agency, their connections. They allowed to buy in and get a percentage of the company. So, yeah, if his bargaining power was that much that every event was being built around him, at that time he might have had a legitimate play, but maybe he's just asking for too much. Either way, he has proved, I think, that he can be bigger outside the cage than he is inside the cage as far as financial gain. He can be more successful, I should say, not bigger, because I think he's always going to be bigger as a fighter. He's just a tough guy that thinks nobody can beat him. He's cocky and confident wherever he goes. But he actually shut down the friggin' Boston St. Patrick's Day parade the other day. Not too long ago. We had a week off, so we didn't get to talk about that last week. But you talk about a popular figure worldwide, especially in the Irish community, and the whiskey thing is a no-brainer for him. I mean, that's probably one of the best products he could step behind and put his name in front of. So, more power to him.
But like you said, this is the second retirement, and you know how this stuff gets in someone's blood.
Right. Well, how many times has Floyd retired?
It's not just the excitement of the fight and the thrill of victory and all that, but it's the lifestyle, it's the discipline in the gym, it's just the everything about it. Right. There's nothing else like it. And why do so many fighters continue to go on long past the point of no return?
Right.
That's because it's an adrenaline rush. It's in the DNA. So Conor, I believe, will turn 30 this year. Mm-hmm. So he still has plenty of time, and we could see him back in a few years. I mean, how many times did we see this story repeat?
Right.
So it'll be interesting.
Well, I think he's learned a lot from Floyd too, from going up against Floyd in boxing, and he admires the guy, and Floyd admires him back. I mean, Floyd's got a freaking mural of him in one of his apartments, so. He likes the guy as much as his adversary for the fight and leading up to it. They jog a lot at each other. I think they have a lot of legitimate respect for each other, and especially Floyd's business model. Conor has respect for and wants to be there. He wants to be at that $100 million burn rate, per year.
Yeah, and I'd have to think that maybe Floyd was a little, even though the fight went Floyd's way, and I think he did have that plan, but Floyd may have been a little surprised that Conor was able to hang as long as he did.
Yeah, see, that's where my theory before that fight was, Conor wins either way. If he survives, he wins. Even though he didn't, but he got close enough. And he did show a lot of heart and a lot of capability for a short notice fight, and nobody would have ever believed if you didn't tell him before that fight that he had no boxing experience whatsoever professional. None.
Yeah, and still went into the 10th round. Yeah. And the fight was competitive. I mean, unless you were a Las Vegas judge, now they added, they were pitching a shutout. I mean, they couldn't have sent their cards in before. And we knew that would happen. But on my card, Conor won the first 3 rounds. Now, I think Floyd was just kind of hanging back, and he had a good plan, and then Floyd turned it on. And we knew at that point, then I had Floyd going for the next 6 rounds, or at least 5. But I mean, it was, still, it was conceivable, even when, Conor was out of gas, but still, he was in that fight, is the point. And I think Floyd had to respect that.
Yeah, so I would think that they'll find ways to work together in combat sports now that he's distanced himself from the UFC, because I think Floyd was a little soured towards the UFC, too, because he was drawing a lot at Dana White, talking about he used to carry my bags, literally. And he used to, in turn, wear a little something I guess that was called Bullen visor that Dana was all about at the time. Some company that Floyd put on his shorts, his fight shorts at one point for him. But anyway, yeah, the relationship obviously soured after that, and it was just a lot of stuff they could have done together if they had a better relationship, Floyd and Dana, and that's where I'm always going to criticize Dana for going out there publicly and saying, "Oh, we're going to do this big Zuffa boxing thing, and we're going to set up all these fights, and you got people all excited about it, and UFC fighters talking about making the crossover. We had the Stipe Miocic versus Anthony Joshua talk, it got all stirred up, and then Dana White didn't do a goddamn thing with it. And, it's sad. Because it was kind of the exact same thing they did with Pride. They talked up, oh yeah, the UFC is going to buy Pride, and Pride in the UFC is going to have Super Bowls of MMA, and it's going to be glorious. And what happened? They killed Pride. So it's something I know too much history about to really not be mad about when that happens. So I've seen that happen, and Conor did a great thing by showing that, hey, the debate has been going on all this time. I'm going to step in and try to prove that the MMA fighter is better. He gave it a shot, but he failed. But you never can doubt. You always have to think about what would he be like with a year of training, or 2 years of boxing training, if he had had that opportunity to do it again, and knowing what he knows now. It might be an even more competitive fight.
Well, yeah, and you have a point. We might find out. I mean, because wherever he goes, he's still going to be a draw. I mean, if he goes into regular boxing, or like you said, he could just try some of the cage boxing. I don't know what they're paying there.
Or you heard this here first. I've been called I know you're the psychic, Tom, but I've actually been called Nostradamus before in my reporting on science. Okay, because I predicted it was going to go bankrupt. But I believe that the best play for Conor, if he does officially retire from MMA, is to try to do a rematch with Floyd. And that's going to make him the most money, so why not? And we may see that start to develop in the next few weeks if it does become final. That he's done. He's walking away. And I don't know how that works if he tries to come back at a later date after going to boxing officially, but I think he would be exclusively able to do that on his own without the Zuffa promotional aspect of it, especially because he's created his own sports entertainment company to co-promote with the UFC on that first fight. So if that's still in place, and he can separate legally from the UFC, that's all his money this time. So that would be a great play for him. And it would be a no-brainer for Floyd because he's already done it once. And he's looking for that gimmick fight. He doesn't want a real fight with Manny again. Manny's looking good, so he would rather have every advantage that he could. And against the guy in his second pro fight, he wouldn't care how much training Conor has beforehand. So that's just my nugget of thought. Figured we'd start off with that topic of conversation because we could really beat it to death. Anyway,
well, I know it never ending fast.
Right. So we got a lot of news this week. We're not going to go all the way back to last week, except to say that Errol Spence had a masterful performance, just as you and Tony predicted. And I didn't.
Yeah, I will say we'll just keep that brief. I called the winner correct, and I think I did it for the right reason. But the only thing I could say, I thought that it would, and I drank a little bit of the pre-fight marketing Kool-Aid, but I thought it might be somewhat more competitive than it was.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen much of it. Did you see any of it?
I did not. Well, I did see a few minutes of it. I was actually watching it in the beginning rounds, and it was the one fight I've actually watched the most of the last few weeks. I shouldn't say I didn't see it, because I did. But at some point, the feed got too distracting to keep going, and I stopped watching. And the fight was one-sided anyway, so I kind of listened to it more than I watched it.
Well,
but,
there was an interesting link on the underground.
Yeah.
We'll discuss that in kind of an interesting situation. So, so I was able to catch the second half. And, it was just exactly as we said. Mikey, it wasn't for lack of heart, and I'm not going to start disrespecting him for it. I mean, he had an old school mindset, and he did the best he could. But he was just overmatched.
He was a little slower,
every way,
a little less crisp.
Speed.
And, It's like the evolution of the sport in a lot of ways. Watching a fight like that, because you have these younger guys. They're doing all the training and conditioning right. They have all these team members who specialize in a certain area, and they take training and preparing for a fight like a science. And Errol Spence, I've seen the pre-fight stuff they do in the training that they show him doing, and it's smart. It's the best way to prepare for a fight and have stamina for no matter what happens, and smart defense, smart head movement. He has a total package, and you even got a guy that goes in there with so much experience, undefeated, can't touch him, or at least can't hurt him. You did touch him a few times.
Yeah. Well, what's the cliche? You master the basics.
Yeah.
And his mastery of the basics is just. He's so good fundamentally. As I said before the Mikey fight, I haven't seen a weakness in him yet. Now maybe Sean Porter can do something, but right now I'm just not seeing it. I think you have to look at him as if not number one pound for pound. I don't know who it is, and I've not seen the weakness. Maybe he'll have one, but until he's exposed, we'll just have to see if his weakness is going to be Father Time, which no one's been able to beat yet. But and you're right about his training. It's just that old school stuff from the 1940s and 50s. It's just like a throwback in time, and it works.
Right.
It works. Boxers have been training that way for decades, and it's worked for him, and he just seems to have fallen right into that. God admire him.
Right. Well, we'll get to this week's schedule of big fights, because we're going to try to just cover the big fights this week, and just go more on the stories in the news and some other debate-like topics. I told you, Tom, before the show, it's going to be like the State of the Union for combat sports. The State of the Union address, but we're both going to give it. It's going to be a team effort. But we had UFC Fight Night 148 over the weekend, March 23rd there, in Nashville, Tennessee. And the big one there was the main event, Anthony Pettis upsetting, I guess you could say, Stephen Thompson. Knocked him out with a Superman punch, was what I read. I didn't see the fight, unfortunately. I promised to watch fights, but I didn't get a chance. But round two. 4 minutes and 55 seconds into round two, so 5 seconds left in the round. And I love how they have the referee listed as just Herb. Instead of Herb being Herb. Okay, so, yeah. And that, I guess that shows that Anthony is back in contention here. He's put the pieces back together, he's improved his game, and he's ready to make a run again.
Well, Rich, I'll fall back on this quote that I use a lot, but this was probably about 3-4 years ago, and I wish I had the time to go through some of our old archives and find that. But we had a fighter on, maybe like a top 20 guy in the boxing welterweight division. But we were talking about the different weight classes, and I remember his comment, and I'm saying this, I'm paraphrasing, but when your body is not where it's meant to be, you're just not going to be able to perform up to point. And whether that means if you're too light, too heavy, you've got to find your natural weight. And it seems like Anthony was right at 155, and then after RDA, he got off track. And then he went down to 145, and that didn't pan out like he was hoping. So maybe he's found his niche at 170. Then again, maybe styles make fights.
Right. Well, it's a very interesting development, because you take away Conor out of the picture, and you talk about exciting potential for a dynamic game plan and a exciting style of fighting, and in-your-face striking. And Anthony Pettis is capable of that. The Showtime punch, or kick, the Showtime kick that he landed on. What's his name there? The long-haired kid with the angel wings.
Yeah, with Wonderboy, the question is he was, a few years ago, it seemed like he was something so unique. It really seemed like his time. And I don't know if you can recall that fight with Wonderboy and Johnny Hendricks. And Wonderboy just did a clinical demolition of him. And it seemed like he had a style that was just unstoppable. And
well, I think Stephen Thompson is going the way of Lyoto Machida in respect that his karate style game plan is getting figured out, and it's you cannot sustain a complete mixed martial arts fight game when your base is so focused on just one aspect of it, which is karate. And his sideways stance and everything like that, it works for some fighters who don't know how to get around it, haven't dealt with it. But if you watch enough tape, you know the weaknesses, and he never changes that approach. He always comes at it like that. He just might change up a little different things that he might do or try, but he doesn't go off the reservation too much. And I think that's his downfall.
Yeah, and that's, I think that just goes for a lot of styles. I remember the early days of the UFC, back in the UFC 1 to UFC probably 5 or 6, if you had a gator fight over before it started.
Right.
But then the fight game started to study things more, and BJJ is still essential. And it's I'm proud to say I was a practitioner when I was training.
Well, I've never actually, I can say I never actually trained in jiu-jitsu at all, but the last real genuine street fight I was in, I used it to submit the kid. So, I shouldn't call him a kid, he's the same age as me, but yeah, I've watched enough of it to learn how useful.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it goes for other sports as well. Like, if you remember the movie Moneyball.
Right.
Well, that concept, and I'm not a baseball guy, but I guess they used a lot of different type of nerd statistics, and were able to put together a winning team on a short budget. But the problem is when everyone starts doing it, the effective just changes, and there's another revolution coming.
Right.
And I think we see that in just about everything. In the financial markets in the 1970s, nobody was using charts. Well, if you would have known that then, you could have made a killing. Now everyone's using them. So when everyone does it, it just doesn't work as well.
Right.
And I think that's what happens with Wonderboy. He just studied the style, and maybe his time is passing by.
That's where a guy like the guy that just beat Anderson Silva there, his clone, they call him, Israel Adesanya. That's where a kid like that comes along and just blows your mind. You're just like, whoa, where the hell did this style come from? And just like his nickname is, the Style Bender. I mean, that's basically what you have to do nowadays to make headway. And as the UFC has always said, put on a show. You've got to put on a show. So not only do you, to advance your career, you have to do well and win your fights, but you have to do that demandingly and get knockouts and be exciting, or else you're not going to get the big money fights next time. So that kind of guy is the future of that league, and the guys like him. But Stephen Thompson still has a chance to change things up. Maybe go to a different camp. Maybe try to bring different people in, not just his own father, to train him. Sometimes that's kind of a battle royale there, even if you get along really great. We had that one fighter on, I forget his name too, but he was talking about the advantages and disadvantages. He's like, the advantages, you do this all the time, and he's got all kinds of insights and everything like that, but the disadvantages, you hear about it all the time. You can never let it go. It's always in your face.
Yeah.
Always a topic of discussion. You can never get away from it. So, it becomes tedious and aggravating sometimes. So anyway, we'll see what happens to Stephen. But Anthony, obviously, his stock is going up. So it's going to be interesting to see who they put up against him next. And we've got co-main event there was pretty interesting too. Unanimous decision for Curtis Blades over Justin Willis. And Jesus didn't have a good week in MMA. Jesus Pinedo lost to John McDessie, also by unanimous decision. Davison Figueiredo losing to Josier De Silva by unanimous decision. And I guess there was a lot of unanimous decisions before the main event in this one. Luis Pena went the distance against Steven Peterson, won that fight unanimous decision. And then there was finally a knockout early in the fight card. Seventh fight of the night, Macy Barber, lucky 7. Got TKO, knees and punches over J.J. Aldrich. Just 3 minutes and 1 second into the second round. We had interesting matchup on the way undercard. Female fight, Randa Marcos beating Angela Hill by armbar submission. 4 minutes and 24 seconds into that one. And, it's a fight. I'm surprised that fight hasn't happened already. Or has it? Is that a rematch? I'll have to check that out. We'll go through that whole card. We do also have fights coming up this weekend. We've got UFC on ESPN2. From Tony's neck of the woods, Wells Fargo Center in Philly. That's going on March 30th. And then we have Bellator tomorrow night. Bellator 219. Sayat Awad versus Brandon Gertz in the main event there. So we'll just transition to those ones. I'm just going to check Randa's record here, see if she fought Angela Hill before. I think they were on the same Ultimate Fighter season, if I remember correctly, or maybe they fought in the house but not in the cage officially. Yeah, it doesn't look like they fought officially before, so that was the first time. Alright, so UFC on ESPN2. It's a big landmark event for these guys. The city of brotherly love there. We've got Edson Barboza versus Justin Gaethje. Talk about two in-your-face strikers right there. Edson is 20-6. Gaethje
I would say that it's long overdue for Gaethje to focus on his wrestling. Because that old Teddy Atlas cliche, if you're going to beat the other guy at his own game, maybe you can. But why would you want to give him the best chance? And I think Gaethje just has to stop if he stays in close. But I think with Barbarossa, he's so explosive with those kicks, you've either got to be too far out or too far in. One way or the other.
Yeah. And
if Gaethje fights smart, I think if he can keep it on the ground, I think it's his. But it's in his DNA to say, you hit me, I'll hit you. And with Barbarossa, that could be...
well, he's got the Henry Corrales mentality. Hey, I'll just get new teeth if mine get knocked out. He just comes forward and takes shots and gives them back, and I really do hope for his own health and safety, never mind his fight plan and his success in the cage, but his own health and safety, that he takes some real hard looks at his defense in his time off here and comes at this with a hands-up approach for a change. Because he could be unstoppable if he had just a little bit more hands-up attitude in there and respect for the other guy's punches. Because he literally made it a game of I can hit you harder than you can hit me, and I can take whatever you throw at me and not even put my hands in front of my face. He's had a few fights like that, and that's just... You cannot sustain that over a career, whether it's an MMA, boxing, or any sport where you get hit in the face.
Right, and especially with the unorthodox kicking attack he's going to be up against with Barbosa.
Yeah.
I mean, we know what that man can do with his kicks. I mean, he's at that weight division. He may be the best with the kicks. I mean, maybe not so much with the punches, but just with those unorthodox, powerful, fast kicks. I don't see anyone at that weight division that could take that. That's why the smart thing to do is try to get him on the ground.
Totally. Well, that's going to be another one I'm going to have to watch. I got no excuse now. It's going to be free. It's not ESPN Plus. It's ESPN. So, yeah, we're going to have to tune in and see how this goes. But what's your psychic prediction? Who's got this? And then I'll get mine.
I think Gaethje's going to be a little bit smarter this time. And that's just my gut feeling on it. I don't think he's going to revert. I mean, again, I could be wrong when the first punch lands, but I just think that he has the style. If he can keep the pressure on, that's the way to fight him. Just pressure. But if he hesitates It's going to be a terrible night for him, but I think he'll come up with a plan, and I think he's going to do it. So, got hold me to it.
Well, I mean, the dynamic here that's interesting is Justin is still fairly new to the UFC. You know, most of the people that he's fought in the past were big stars in another league, you know, smaller league. So he's really getting thrown to the big fish right away, and he's going to take a big adjustment period to be able to be a big star in this league, even though he was already the biggest star in the other league.
Yeah, but okay, Rich, he's been around a couple of years now in the UFC.
Yeah, but
so how long do we have to?
Here he's fighting a guy who's been in the UFC almost his whole career. So it's a big stretch, I think, for him to.
Well, I mean, I would just say it's time to shine. I mean, and he's had some success. I think that he's kind of been his own biggest problem at times, lack of defense.
On the other side, you look at Edson, and a couple of his losses are against a couple of the biggest stars in the UFC. So, the last big win was his last fight, December 15th, a knockout of Dan Hooker, who isn't what they call a world beater. You know, he's a good fighter, but Justin Gaethje, I think, is at a higher level for sure. So, I think both of these guys are going to have their game faces on, and I really think it's going to be a matter of who hits who the hardest first. I think it might be a first round knockout, but I just would go for the kicks over the punches with Edson. I think Edson's going to land a hit kick and end it. And Gaethje, it don't matter what kind of defense he has for that, because Barboza can kick right through the hands up, even if he does keep his hands up. But you know, I got a feeling Gaethje's going to slip, let his hands down, and get caught. That's my prediction.
Well, I just think he's got to keep the pressure on and stay out of kicking range. And if he does that, I think he can pull it off. And if he doesn't, you're right. I mean, it's just if he's out there at long distance, we know who's going to win that one.
All right. And we also have a pretty decent co-main event there. We got David Brants versus Jack Hermanson. David is 22-5. Jack is 18-4. And we got Michael the Menace Johnson. He's 18-13. Don't let his record fool you. One of the best fights I've ever seen, period, was Michael versus Justin. Talk about a brawl. Oh my God. Brutal. Justin ended up, I think, coming out on the top of that one, if I remember correctly. All I remember from that one, it was just like a blur of fists.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting, because you can't count Michael Johnson out.
Yeah.
I mean, he has a lot going for him, and I think right now he really needs a win in this one.
And he's fighting Josh Emmett, who's 13-2, just 2 losses, but we don't know what kind of caliber of fighter he can beat. He's still fairly new to the UFC himself, but he was pretty dynamic. As we've seen.
Well, and this is one that Emmett needs to make a good comeback, you know, from his setback. So, yeah, this is going to be a wild one.
And let's see, he's 13-2. His last fight was a loss to Jeremy Stevens, knockout elbows, second round. $135 into the second. That was back in February of 2018. So actually, he's been off for a year since that. So. He won the fight before that by knockout against Ricardo Lamas.
Yeah, so we'll just see, because you remember Emmett really had some good momentum going into that after you know, he had a win streak.
Then we have quite the dynamic female fight.
Set that for him against.
Right. Great female fight in the 10th fight of the night. Carolina Kowalkiewicz, 12-3, fighting Michelle Watterson, 16-6, otherwise known as the Karate Hottie. Speaking of karate, talked about that earlier. But yeah. Also on this card we have Paul Craig coming in at 10-3 versus Kennedy. I'm not even going to bother pronouncing that one. And a Chukwu.
Yeah, that's a tough name.
I don't even know.
Yeah. Paul Craig is the Scottish Kung Fu guy. He says Kung Fu is a style. It doesn't look like much Kung Fu. But that's how he does himself. Kung Fu.
Yeah. And 8th fight of the night.
In the 70s. You weren't around in the 70s, Rich, when that was a big boom. Okay. 73, 74, yeah, the David Carradine Kung Fu show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, definitely some UFC influence with the, what's his name? Bruce Leroy.
Yeah.
So that was quite the character. I'm pretty sure he's still in the UFC, but I don't know. His contract might have run out after his last fight. But anyway, we also have Shaman Moraes in the 8th fight of the night. He's 11-2, fighting Sodiq Yusuff, who is 8-1. We got Jessica Aguilar also on this card in a big female fight. She has 20 wins in the cage, 7 losses, and fighting Marina Rodriguez, who's undefeated at 10-0-1. And then we got a couple journeymen battling each other here in the 6th fight of the night. Ross Pearson always comes to fight. He is 20-15, fighting Desmond Green, who's 21-18. So
Ross Pearson has been around since let's see, it was the year I went to Las Vegas, 2006. He was on the Ultimate Fighter show. 2006. Well, let's go back.
Mm-hmm. Then Kevin Aguilar, 16-1, fighting Enrique Barzola, 15-3-1. So great on paper matchups there. Looks like competitive matchmaking. Then we got 4th fight of the night. Kevin Holland, 13-4, fighting Gerald Meerschaert, who is 28-10. 3rd fight of the night is Ray Borg, 11-3, fighting Casey Kenny, 11-1-1. And then we have 2nd fight of the night, undefeated Sabina Mazo, a female fight. She's 6-0, fighting Marina Moroz, who is 8-3. And then the 1st fight of the night is some impressive fighters for a leadoff fight. Impressive records. Alex Perez, 21-5, fighting Mark De La Rosa, 11-1. And then we have to move on to tomorrow night's fights. Couple tough individuals here in the main event from Temecula, California. We've got Sayad Awad fighting Brandon Gertz, and Awad is 23-10. Gertz is 15-8. But you talk about some tough guys right there. Yeah, they've been around the block a time or two. So I like Brandon Gertz in this one. Sayad Awad is a very technical fighter, but Brandon Gertz just runs through people lately, and I really like him in his style. I think he's gonna have what it takes to beat up on Sayad. Sayad has a little bit more experience, maybe, but
he
Brandon.
Yeah, and Gertz is just a steamroller. I mean, like a tank. You know, he just keeps coming. I mean, that was a description of a Boom Boom and seeing tactic. He's like a tank, you know, just coming at you, rolling you over. So I would agree. I think he'd have a slight edge, but again, it's going to be a very good matchmaking, competitive fight.
Brawler versus technician. I like the brawler. And then we have Daniel Strauss. Been around the block a few times in Bellator, of course. Fought in a lot of key fights, a lot of trilogy matchups there. And comes in at 24-8 versus Shane Crookton, who is 12-4. I don't know much about him. I don't know if I've seen it. If I have seen him fight, I've forgotten about it, so that's not good for Shane. Anyway, but these days I'm doing so much logging, I haven't watched a lot of fights, so maybe I have seen him, I just don't remember. But anyway, Andrei Korshkov, 21-3, is on the card as well, fighting Mike Jasper, who is 13-4, and one of my favorite fighters, whether it be kickboxing or MMA, Joe Schilling, coming in the the 12th fight of the night, but the 3rd fight down for the main event there is 3-5 is his record coming in MMA. He's obviously got a better kickboxing record, but Keith Berry is his opponent, who has a just over 500 record, 15-14-1. And you got to go all the way down to middle of the card for the next best fight. We've got David Caveman Rickles, 20-5, fighting AJ Matthews, who's 9-8. Nothing too spectacular on the rest of that card. We got Sean Bunch 8-3 versus Dominic Mazzota 14-2. That's a pretty good matchup. We'll do it for fight cards coming up. And let's see. Let's just go through a little bit of the boxing. From last week, we had the Peterson brothers in action. Anthony did slightly better with a draw versus Arguinis Mendez. Again, I wasn't able to see these fights, but sad news for Lamont. He decided to retire after losing to Sergey Lipinets in the big Showtime card last weekend, last Sunday. Or was that a Fox card?
Yeah, that was Fox.
Okay, yeah, that was a Fox pay-per-view. But yeah, I missed that. Anyway, also last weekend, Rico Ramos lost to Jesse Magdaleno. That was another big fight. And we had Julio Cesar, not Chavez, but Martinez Aguilar beating Andrew Selby over in the UK. I imagine that fight was. And this weekend, really, probably the biggest fight is overseas, not in the US. We've got Liam Smith versus Sam Eggington in the UK on Saturday, and I don't know where this one, but Alexander Gavodzic versus Dudu Ngumbu is the other big fight of the weekend. And not much else, but boy, there's a shitload of hard to pronounce names on the front page of Box Rec this week. So it's a good week not to go through all the entire schedule. So we got some other stuff we're going to get to in a minute here, but yeah. That one, trying to find out where it is. Doesn't say. Tickets. Oh, maybe it is in the US. Doesn't look like it says where it is here for some reason. Alright. And also have some big news with Cain Velasquez, the UFC heavyweight. Talk about retiring from the UFC. Cain has taken his love for pro wrestling to the next level. He actually officially inked a deal with a AAA promotion down in Mexico. So we might literally see him become one of those lucha libre folks with the masks.
Yeah, is Cain and this retirement?
I don't know if this is officially retirement or if it's just his way of serving out. Doesn't he have a suspension for PEDs or something going on? Or?
Well, no. I because remember he just fought in February.
Oh.
And I just don't know if his contract is expired.
Maybe.
Because the UFC's kind of strict on that, unless you're a real big draw like a Conor or Ronda Rousey or Brock Lesnar. But I hadn't heard that.
August 3rd is when he's going to make his debut in the Mexican capital. And he also, I remember talking about this during one of our shows. He made a training appearance at the WWE Performance Center in Orlando, Florida, where he worked out and attended the NXT tapings for the WWE. So this could be like, going to the minor leagues for a little while. You might only have to stay there for a few months, and then bam, he's a WWE star. So it's a shame we didn't have Tony's input on this, but we'll have to pick his brain on that subject.
So now you know how they'll play that, because when Shamrock and then Severn went to the WWE, they announced it would be their third fight. I'm not a wrestling fan, so I don't know results. But you know that they'll be doing that in Brock if Brock's still with the organization.
Well, this article says this year's WrestleMania weekend in New York will also feature independent pro wrestling cards in which former UFC heavyweight champions Frank Mir and Dan Severn will perform. That's when you mentioned Severn.
Perform.
Yes, I don't know what that means.
Perform.
I don't know if they're going to screw each other or fight. But I guess we'll find out.
An exhibition.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord.
So, it is what it is.
Right here, Dan Severn. On the Odd Couple.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess we'll finish off with the subject I mentioned before the show that we should discuss. And that's the UFC starting to slip. I think we're seeing their popularity in the marketplace and their staying power and their ability to hold on to big names. They're starting to deteriorate. And boxing is at the same time making these huge moves, going to the streaming services, getting away from the networks. It just did a Fox pay-per-view. It's been never done before. It's just new territory all over the place, new ground, blazing new paths, and MMA is starting to sort of fragment. We've got some of these UFC stars like the Ben Askren trade. Looks like maybe Ben Askren was a little in over his head in his first performance, even though he acted like he didn't do anything wrong in his post-fight interview. You've got what we just talked about, Cain Velasquez, obviously thinking he's got a better shot with going to the WWE. Hey, you even got New England Patriots news impacting that scene because Gronkowski just retired from the Patriots, and there's all kinds of talk that he's going to end up in the WWE. So, we always talk about football players, stealing the best athletes from combat sports that could be world beaters in MMA or boxing. Now you've got the WWE stealing a football player, which could be huge for them. And then, so boxing and wrestling might be more popular and aggressive right now than the biggest player in MMA, which is the UFC, and it's kind of crazy. But I think it's true. I think that's really what we're seeing. And that's why you got a guy like Conor McGregor willing to walk away at this point. Because what does he have to prove? Like, what can he prove, really? It's just kind of like, bad.
Yeah, or maybe he also feels that the current 155-pound king has a nightmare style for Conor.
Right.
I mean, who knows? There could be a whole bunch of reasons. I don't think it has to be one. It could just be a lot of things adding up. And because I think in a rematch he'd really still have his hands full with Khabib. So.
Yeah, and Khabib wants to fight Floyd too in a boxing match. So it's like, that to me, I think UFC thought maybe it was going to be its biggest play to do that boxing match, but in a way it was its biggest mistake because you've got both of these guys just coming off one of the biggest fights of their lives, and their best option is to fight a guy not even in their sport. It's sad.
Yeah.
And it's what I've been saying for years and years and years. It's a fact that the UFC, number one, does not pay their fighters enough. They can't even cover expenses half the time for a lot of their support staff to get in there without their side sponsors, and they can't even have side sponsors now that are actually allowed to be presented in the cage or during pre-fight events. So it just makes it very difficult for the independent contractor who signed up with the UFC to make a living and to do a whole career there without having to rely on outside sources of income or just being independently wealthy if they're lucky. It's just harder and harder to make a go of it, whereas they look on the other side now, and it's even worse because boxing is making such a big push now, and all the money is being invested in boxing. So there used to be a time when the UFC was unique in this Fight Pass thing. They were kind of, unfortunately for them, the corners of that market, and now everybody's just demolished them in that space. Not to say the Fight Pass is obsolete, but it's obviously got a lot of competitors now with boxing, and the WWE has a good platform in that regard too. So I think we're going to see in the next few months. It's a lot of it comes down to personalities.
Right. And right now, it just seems like, and I mean, we've got the emergence in boxing, and the heavyweight division's exciting all of a sudden. Tyson Fury or Deontay Wilder, and on down the line with Canelo and Triple G, and I mean, yeah, the personalities are standing out more in boxing, I think, at this point.
Right.
And it's like, look at the defections from the UFC. I mean, they can't seem to keep Brock Lesnar and Ronda Rousey and on down the line like that. And there's just no real big, exciting personalities here. Great fighters. But
and I think we're going to see the whole Premier Boxing Champions thing. That model, you know, in hindsight, it's going to be like, wow, that might have been the kickoff to all this. Why we're here in the boxing world today with all this success going on with the streaming networks is because that play by them, even though it didn't make any financial sense at the time they made it, and I even criticized the shadiness of the way they threw it on the investment fund and made people pay for it without really telling them what was going on. It was a little bit of a shady play, and a lot of crazy money behind it. You know, maybe was acquired in a way that was less than above board, but it worked. You can't knock that. It definitely worked. And for them to get to that level where they've taken Premier Boxing Champions to all these good networks that have kept it and run with it to the point where now they're doing Fox pay-per-view at that level, you know, it's something that's never been done before. It shows that the sport has room to grow and is definitely not dying. Teddy Atlas would love to talk about that subject. I think he's probably one of the best commentators to address that. And I got to do a great interview with him. I'm sure that came up. I don't remember offhand exactly what he said about it, but yeah, I'm pretty sure he just echoed his comments that he always makes. We've heard the death knell of boxing so many times. It's had so many funerals, but it's still there. And the UFC, I think,
it's just cycles
behind the times. Yeah. And where they could have made bigger deals, they failed. They made restrictive deals with Reebok. They alienated their own fighters. They had rigid sets of commissions basically for whatever kits the fighters sold of their own. They had set rates of sponsorship that these fighters were going to get, and they're going from being able to negotiate their own contracts, and these people only having to pay what they call a finder's fee or gatekeeper fee of $50,000 or something to get their foot in the door and be on a fighter's shorts and get in cage on TV. And you can all remember the days of the funny stuff like Condom Depot on guys' fight shorts on his ass, or some of the other ones that were pretty funny. And then the Reebok deal comes along, and not only do they forbid fighters from putting other logos and sponsors on their shorts, but they even told Cowboy Cerrone he couldn't put a little patch on his short to commemorate his grandmother. So they took it to the extreme.
Yeah, and again, when big corporations come into it, and I know you weren't following things back in the early infancy of the sport, but back then it almost was like one of the requirements you had to be just an eccentric wild man. I mean, these were some colorful personalities back then. I'm talking the
Tank
Abbott days,
yeah.
Timo, and just the characters that were around back then, but they generated a buzz.
Right.
And when corporations take over, it's like one mindset, and watch what you say and all that. And I mean, I realize they had to tame it from the Wild West days of those, early to mid '90s. I mean, some of those back then they would just keep the camera running for 3 hours, and you'd get. They even had a drunken Tank Abbott doing commentary on a few of them. Those are some real gems. I still have something on VHS. So I got to get that stuff converted to DVD and get it on a computer and send you some of those things.
Yeah.
It's like that would not fly at all right now, which I understand it's changed. But the fighters, everyone says, well, it's big money. Now, big money for who?
Right.
Big money for who? That would be the question. Because when I talk about the old days, well, I think in UFC 1, Horace Gracie had 3 fights that night. Had to run the table and got a $50,000 check. And I think with the others, it was not much more than a couple $1,000s to show.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, with the UFC today, and like you said, with that corporate mentality, I think they've distanced themselves from the passion of the fighter who came along to do it, not for the money, but just for the privilege of being able to match up with another fighter and see which style won out, and just to show your ability in the cage. It was just a lot of times in the early days, even when we started Fight News Unlimited back in, I want to say 2004, when the Science case ended up starting, like pretty much right around the same time. It was 2004, I think it was, and it was just really starting to develop. Then I think the first official UFC card I ever watched was Chuck Liddell versus Rampage Jackson. That's how long ago that was. Oh, man. But I got to know a little bit of history from watching DVDs of the 100's Greatest Fights and stuff like that over the years. But, yeah, I kind of got into the scene late. But I noticed the way, especially from working on the Zions case, the difference between the way the Fertittas ran that company, the UFC, and the way corporate interests, even though Dana White's still the mouthpiece, and the asshole, I should say. But, yeah, the Fertittas ran it with an iron fist, and they legitimately struck fear in the hearts and minds of their fighters. And a lot of those fighters did not speak out, because they knew that with two brothers in ownership like that, with a friggin' mob history, you don't speak out, or you don't. Yeah, if you do, you don't get opportunities ever again in certain cases, or you get thrown right the hell out if you speak out like John Fitch did and said, "I don't want my likeness to be used in a video game," and you get lifetime rights to it. So they threw him right the hell out for that. And that's the kind of stuff that the other fighters look at and say, "Well, geez, if I'm the friggin', stick in the mud, then it's just going to go downhill for my career here, and I might be stuck here for a while because I'm under contract, so I can't say anything about how bad it is." And nowadays, you've got the corporate interests involved, and you've got a guy like Colby Covington, who will go and friggin' heckle Dana White and demand a title shot when he's snubbed, because he knows he can get away with it now. What are they going to do? Send a corporate security guy after him? I mean, there's no like.
Yeah, I guess personality-wise, he's very much like the early days, and he's. But I guess the thing is, he's more of an anomaly now. Whereas in the early days, there were so many like him.
Yeah.
Harold Clarence Howard, these kind of loons, and just a lot of real wild men, and he fits that category, which kind of makes me wonder how he has a long leash now.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me wonder how he's pulled that off.
Because he's right, like he's legitimately been screwed over and passed by, and he has legitimate talent. And the other guy that comes to mind, who's one of my absolute favorite dissers of Dana White, Al Iaquinta, Raging Al.
Yes.
Oh my God! So talk about some of the most classic FU moments in the history of the sport, calling out Dana White. That guy went off a few times, and you see what happened to him even in the post Fertitta days. What did they do to him? They threw him in against Khabib Nurmagomedov on like a week's notice. Talk about throwing a guy to the wolves. And he was game, he tried, but he just didn't have a good camp, or enough of a camp to match up with the guy.
Well, but remember, he survived the distance,
right?
Which is astonishing on short notice. So who knows? I'm not saying he would have won if he had a full training camp, but I mean the fact that he hung on, which most guys don't. And
one of the things that gave him a platform, I think, to be able to tell Dana what to go fuck himself was excuse my French, the fact that he's a real estate agent outside the cage. He's independently wealthy, like I said. So he can step aside and say, well, my career doesn't really matter in the cage because I can make more outside the cage. So
yeah, that's kind of like that old Teddy Atlasism. He has options,
right?
And a lot of times you can look at both fighters, and when one doesn't have options, and one does, that may factor into things at times, in a lot of different ways. Yeah, that's so true.
So, I'll use a phrase from the Donald Trump interview where I got to ask him the one question in the conference call. And he said, it's going to be interesting to see. I noticed today, if you listen to his speeches, he says that a lot. That's one of his catchphrases. It's going to be interesting to see. But yeah, we'll see how it all unfolds. And I think the UFC is not stupid about the fact that it's starting to lose market power and the ability to draw as much eyeballs to the sport as it used to. And it's not. They don't even use the phrase meteoric rise anymore, or whatever the heck they were using to describe the fastest growing sport of the world. They're not saying that anymore.
Right. That's why you have to still keep paying for streams. Well, I noticed that there's no pay-per-view for the major golf tournaments. Right. There's no pay-per-view for Wimbledon tennis matches. There's no pay-per-view for the Super Bowl. No pay-per-view for the World Series. No pay-per-view for the NBA Finals or the Stanley Cup. No. And when the pay-per-view stops and they get enough sponsors, maybe we can talk about this nonsense about the fastest growing sport. But it's a niche.
Right.
It's apparently going to remain a niche, and now it's become a corporate niche. And even the styles. I mean, I understand everything had to evolve, but again, with the early days, part of the fascination was that contrast of styles.
Right.
And with the fact that the fighters could say just about anything they wanted in any interview. I mean, there was, I've probably told you before about that. UFC 13 was spring of 1997 in that drunken Mark Coleman interview. And again, I have that. I got to get these things. I got to get in the 21st century. You got to get that machine. I guess there's a machine you can get to get these VHS things onto DVD. And this interview was just absolutely. Was Joe Rogan's first time on the job. He was the dressing room guy. He wasn't doing the blow by blow. What do they call it?
Right.
The color commentator. He was back there, and Mark Coleman, I think, had been hitting the bar quite a bit, and he was mad because one of his guys. And this is before Mark Coleman was going to be fighting Maurice Smith, and he got on a rant. Maurice said, "You got to effing learn how to effing." Well, so you're going to get it down. That's my goddamn strategy. He's just going on and on, but it sold him up for the fight. At the excitement up, that wouldn't last a minute now.
Yeah.
And you know, there's something else with ESPN. I think they're treating MMA as Don Fry saying from the old days that said, "Oh, my trainer beats me like a red-headed stepchild." Well, what happened to UFC tonight?
Right.
And Fox, Fox had UFC tonight on at a civilized time. Now I guess they're going to make a show on ESPN with Ariel Harani, but it's late. It's on midnight.
Well, that's the thing that blows my mind because
it seems like a lot of this.
You have like all the hype around that agreement with ESPN. Everybody's saying, this legitimizes the UFC. This makes them a major player in sports. But I flip through the ESPN channels all the time, and I rarely see side coverage or complimentary programming. I see all kinds of crazy, stupid stuff that I'd never watch on ESPN Classic. But why not use ESPN Classic to show old UFC fights? That would be a great idea.
Right.
Why don't you use every bit of that platform? All three of those, ESPN 1, 2, and 3. Put some content out there.
And I believe that this is a step backwards because ESPN is not making MMA much of a priority. They're just not. And you could tell with Fox, we had different outlets on there. Like we had Fox Sports 1, and then there was the regular the Fox Sports. Well, actually, I had 4 different ways to see the fights.
Yeah.
And now normally there's a Fox Sports Ohio, but then they had another Fox Sports, the regular channel.
Fox Sports 2.
And so I mean, and then they had the Revenue channel.
Yeah.
So we got to see fights on there, and with ESPN, it's just a whole different game now.
Mm-hmm.
We're not seeing the build-up. Where's the countdown at?
Right.
I mean, I don't recall even seeing the count. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I've been missing it. I mean, this has been a busy time of year for me, but it's just different somehow. At least that's my feel. And like you said, it's. I mean, with Fox, you know, that they would show the countdown on all the 4 different Fox channels sometimes. And if you missed it on one, you could catch it on the other. But I'm just not seeing it here. And then
they used to do that.
2 a.m.
They used to do that UFC Unleashed all the time, late at night. You know, like talk about showing old fights. You know, they show 3 or 4 knockouts in a row, or you know, a bunch of classic good fights. Just mix it up, different fighters. Yeah, I don't think ESPN is really that into it right now. It's got a lot going on, though. It's funny because ESPN just went through massive layoffs not too long ago. It makes me wonder where's all the money suddenly coming from. They just acquired Disney too. I mean, not Disney. Fox. Fox is part of Fox.
It's been presented to us like, well, the contract with Fox ended, so goodbye. Well, you couldn't renew a contract. Which side didn't want to renew the contract?
Yeah. Or which side was asking too much?
I don't know the answer to that question. But I'm just wondering about that because UFC is presenting this as, hey, Fox was great, but now we're in the big leagues. I'm not seeing it like that.
No.
I'm just not. And Fox hasn't missed a beat because now they've timed it perfect with their boxing coverage, and we're seeing more of that than we were, and we're seeing less MMA.
Yep. Well, time will tell, as they say, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes. I really think Bellator is going to keep improving, and it might not be overnight, but you got promotions like Bellator and one championship over in the Asian countries. They start to get more of the market share, and they start to get more UFC fighters away from the big league there and into their formats, and you're going to see more and more fragmenting of the sport, less and less quality main events from the UFC, and they're going to have a harder time keeping up with some of these other leagues eventually. And next thing you know, Bellator could be the big one. I would not put it past Scott Coker to get there.
I don't know if you've seen the card last Friday, but Bellator at times, one of my critiques there is you will see people on television that are brought there to lose, more or less. You know, you'll see these guys. Well,
Coker comes from more of a work-style, Japanese, type of promotional attitude. He brings in a guy like Crow Cop. He had the situation with Kimbo there. The Kimbo situation troubled me from the very beginning because Kimbo shouldn't have been in the cage with his issues.
Well, yeah.
And that steroid thing killed him.
But
I literally think that killed him. And they should have known.
About a pro fighter with a record of 1-1, and really unskilled and old, fighting some young guy that's like 10-0. Well, you kind of know it's almost like you see in boxing sometimes. You look at the records, you look at the fighters, and you know someone's brought in that really doesn't belong in here. And I think Bellator's got to clean that up somewhat if they can. Hopefully they can, but I think you make a good point because I would think that with the fighters that have left the UFC for their own tour, it would have to be for money.
Well, also, Scott Coker is a fighter. He's not a fucking boxercise instructor like Dana White was. Dana White never had a fight in his goddamn life. He got smacked around in a sparring session. That's why he has a freaking bad ear. And it's just like so much more respect goes to Scott Coker, the way he runs that organization. And if you ever listen to anybody who really knows him, who is a fighter, they'll tell you, he comes across as a guy who respects fighters more too, and doesn't criticize the shit out of them if they have a bad night in the cage, you know. So I think that has a lot to do with how Bellator can start attracting more of these guys. But it's not just Bellator that's going to do it. It's going to be like a complete transformation from all the different leagues that are independent of the UFC. It's funny because they still haven't decided the monopoly case yet. You know, the antitrust lawsuit, that's still ongoing, as far as I know. But at the same time, the monopoly issues are kind of becoming moot because it's getting more and more competition just by the nature of the fact that they're assholes the way they do business. So, you know, that's overpowering behavior is going to come back to bite them, I think. And hopefully I'll get my book out before then, my book about the UFC and their attitudes and everything. It's called Show Me the Money. I've been taking notes about it for like 6 years, but eventually I'm just going to sit down for a month and write it. I'm going to analyze all those issues and maybe get it out right at the right time.
Yeah, I guess you just have to get that right or starve mindset. That's what I'm going to be focusing on when tax season ends with my writing efforts. It's time to get this thing into much better gear than it's been.
Yeah.
You're going to write or you don't. Come on. Just sit there. In fact, I'm reading a good motivational book on now. Did you ever hear of a gentleman, Charles Bukowski? Ever hear of him?
Have I ever heard of that guy? Let me tell you. Okay. All right. That guy is my fucking hero. That guy is my hero. All right. Let me read you something. A quote from him. Okay, real quick. How in the hell could a man enjoy being awakened at 6:30 a.m. by an alarm clock, leap out of bed, dress, force feed, shit, piss, brush teeth and hair, and fight traffic to get to a place where essentially you made lots of money for somebody else and were asked to be grateful for the opportunity to do so? How's that?
I'm reading on writing now.
Oh, beautiful.
Okay. And what a character. What a character. And I look at that kind of writing along with Hunter Thompson and the Jack Londons and, you know, just, and he had, I was reading another thing from him. We're getting off.
Oh, no, he was a fighter, too, though.
The point
is, he's a great story of a fighter, I'll tell you what. He had to fight his parents growing up. He had to fight the system. He had to fight alcoholism.
He had to fight everything.
Yeah. So
he
even had to fight off women.
These guys. What is it? Battling alcoholism.
Yes.
Battling. If it doesn't come bursting out of you, in spite of everything, don't do it. Now the question was, so you want to be a writer? Unless it comes a mask out of your heart, in your mind, in your mouth, in your gut, don't do it. If you have to sit for hours staring at your computer screen or hunched over your typewriter searching for words, don't do it. If you're doing it for money or fame, don't do it. If you're doing it because you want women in your bed, don't do it. If you have to sit there and rewrite it again and again, don't do it. If it's hard work just thinking about doing it, don't do it. If you're trying to write like someone else, forget about it. And I was reading that and I got to learn more about this guy. Yeah. So there we go. So that's got to be the mantra for this year.
Oh, yeah.
Write or starve.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe by this time next year I'll be talking to you about doing my taxes because I'll be having so much income.
Well, you got an ace up your sleeve, buddy. So that's it. So.
And on that note, I definitely have to mention before we sign off. My book is now available on Kindle. If you go to Amazon, search Rich Bergeron and Representing Yourself in Court. There's a lot of details about my battle with the UFC's former owners, the Fertittas, which is why I have such good insight on how they ran the company. And it's a lot to do with this company called Zions that, if you follow the sport, you know, was a big sponsor in the early days of the UFC. And the Fertittas came in and purposely bankrupted this company after putting money in to act like it was solvent long enough for them to not violate their loan covenants. And all that connects to pride lied to in some weird way because they had that loan in place to buy Pride, where the covenants had to show that they had strong sponsorships. So it was a lot of financial activity that was very shady, very off color, and just totally disgusting the way they treated the shareholders of that company, and they made the founder the fall guy just because he had a record and was a legitimate con man. But nevertheless, he went to jail for 4 years for tax evasion. Just got out, and the Fertitas just got away scot-free and turned around and sold the company for $150 million. And if that was the only case I was involved in, that would still be a good book, but it's not.
Good stuff, bud.
I was involved in a case that went all the way to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, and talk about some grueling legal work involved in that case. I wasn't even a party to the case. It was just me being named in injunction. They were afraid that I was going to write a book about this woman's life. And the doctor who gave her a plastic surgery treatment that totally failed sued her to get her to shut up about it. And totally just got the best judge possible and corrupted the system, and it was just a nightmare. And the woman ended up committing suicide, but because she was killed by the justice system. I mean, it's just it's probably going to be the first movie that ever comes of any of my work, because I actually reread the book recently. I have an issue going on with U-Haul, and that's another story, but basically it just made me realize that that's probably one of my most powerful stories that has not really been told adequately, because it even frustrates me to think about that lawsuit and the way it ended with this woman Lucille killing herself. It's just so tragic that the legal system failed her so badly that was her only option in the end. And the book gets into a little bit of that.
Are you going to be able to get the book out in paperback also, or just going to keep it on Kindle?
It's already in paperback. It's already maybe $88. It's been a couple of years.
Okay, so let's.
But I've never marketed it the way I should.
Again, so let's give another plug for it on Amazon, and the title is Representing
Yourself in Court, and it's the subtitle, A Practical Guide to Legal Self-Help, Effective Protest Methods, and Investigative Reporting Practices. Because what the equalizer is, a lot of people don't realize, is the fact that technology has come so far, and the ability to get your First Amendment rights exercised and taken advantage of for your case. You don't just go in court, because a lot of people that have a court experience will tell you the thing that you really want is the last thing you're going to get in court, which is an apology. And nobody ever gives an apology. An apology comes in the form of a judgment usually. When you have a situation where the court isn't helping you, you have another outlet, and that's the media. And 9 times out of 10, this traditional media might not listen to what you have to say because it's not a big enough story for them. But if you can toot your own horn in the public eye and totally just demolish all doubt over your case by putting the truth out there, and you actually hold the system more accountable that way, because now they have to watch out for the moves they make because you're showing it in the public eye. It's not only the court system that's seeing what they're doing now, the whole world can see what they're doing. So it's basically a foolproof way to get yourself out of any trouble and to hold people accountable and make the system honest. And I've seen a lot of dishonesty in the system. It's really sad, to use another Donald Trump word.
So the key is, just like in fighting, have a good defense and then an aggressive counterattack.
Yeah.
Do it smart.
Be smart.
So
until next week.
Let's go on there and get the book. All right, but next week we'll do it.
All right, thanks a lot.